Hello, you beautiful lot, and welcome back to The Observing Eye. This week we are continuing our season of Fire and Ice with an exploration of the Russian philosopher Lev Shestov. He is the guy who basically went to war with the idea that anything has to be the way that it is. So get comfortable, and I hope you enjoy the episode. You are standing at the funeral and someone says it was God's plan. Their hand on your shoulder, their voice certain, practiced, like they've said this before and it worked and it'll work again. It was God's plan. Your mother, your child, your friend who wouldn't stop shaking. God's plan. And you're supposed to nod. You're supposed to find comfort in the idea that this horror means something, that suffering has purpose, that if you squint hard enough at the mechanism, you'll see the design. This is your first lesson in philosophical violence. Not the violence of the loss itself, the violence of the explanation. The insistence that tragedy must make sense, that death follows divine logic or natural law or karmic balance or evolutionary necessity. That things happen for a reason and your job isn't to scream at the reason but to accept it, to let understanding close the wound, to trade your rage for a system that promises meaning if you'll just stop asking why it had to be this way. Fast forward. You are drowning in data now. The algorithm knows your pain is just serotonin deficiency. The therapist knows your anxiety follows cognitive patterns. The app knows your loneliness can be solved with 5 evidence-based techniques. And you accept it because science is real, because psychology works, because reason is reason is reason. You've graduated from divine plans to neural pathways, and you call this progress. You call this healing. You call it understanding yourself. Lev Shestov called it surrender. While his contemporaries built philosophical systems to make sense of suffering, Shestov declared war on sense-making itself. While Europe pretended reason would save it from collapsing empires and mechanized slaughter, Shestov wrote that reason was the disease pretending to be the cure. While every philosopher from Plato to Hegel taught acceptance of what must be, Shestov said the moment you accept necessity, you've already lost the only thing worth fighting for. He lived through revolution and exile, watched rational men build rational arguments for irrational violence, saw philosophy explain everything except why explanation never stops the bleeding, and he concluded that thinking had one job and one job only: to refuse comfort, to reject the consolation of understanding, to wage eternal war against necessity itself. He called it Athens versus Jerusalem, reason versus faith, the tyranny of logic versus the violence of the impossible. And he spent his entire life on Jerusalem's side, knowing he'd lose, knowing reason always wins in the end. We live in Athens now, triumphant, total, Athens as code, Athens as algorithm, as the voice in your head that says, be realistic, be rational, accept what cannot be changed. We live in the age of optimization, and we've optimized ourselves into explanations we call insights, into patterns we call self-knowledge. Shestov saw this coming a century ago, and what he offers isn't hope. Hope is Athens in disguise, another rational calculation about probable outcomes. What he offers is permission. Permission to say no to necessity, to refuse explanation even when the explanation is right, to insist that nothing must be as it is, that every law can break, that the impossible is always possible even when it isn't. This is philosophy as insurrection. Welcome to the violence of reason.
835.
I don't know what's going on with my voice tonight. I feel like I'm doing my best impression of Geralt of Rivia. Has anyone seen Siri? Siri! Let's start, shall we? Before I lose it. Lev Shestov. All right, Lev Isaacovich Shestov. Just take this seriously. Lev Isaacovich Shestov. I did that in one take. Was born in 1866 in Kiev with a name that would get him killed a generation later, and a mind that understood too early what understanding costs. His father was a textile merchant, respectable, successful, the kind of success that says you've figured out how the world works and now you work the world. Young Lev, keeping it casual, studied mathematics and law at Moscow universities, because that's what smart kids did when the empire still pretended merit mattered more than blood. He learned proofs and precedents. He learned that reality follows rules, and rules follow logic, and logic is the only God that doesn't discriminate. He graduated, he was qualified, he was ready to join the rational order of things. And then something broke. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just a slow realization that every equation solved created new emptiness, that every legal principle he mastered made human suffering more administrable but never less real, that his friends were dying young, and the mathematics couldn't explain why brilliance burns out before mediocrity even gets warm. He watched his closest companion, a student named Klyachko, waste away from illness. He watched the doctors offer explanations like gifts, neurological deterioration, inevitable, necessary, neatly wrapped, as if naming the mechanism made it less obscene. Shestov started writing. Not philosophy yet, this was literary criticism, attacks on the writers everyone else worshipped. He went after Tolstoy first, not for writing badly, but for writing hopefully, for thinking that if we just understood society's laws, we could fix society's wounds. He tore apart Dostoevsky next, who we did in the previous episode, not for his insights, just dropping that in there in case you want to listen to it, not for his insights into suffering, but for his need to make suffering mean something, to wrap Russian agony in orthodox redemption and call it answered. This is what separated Shestov from every other smart, angry young man with a pen. He wasn't looking for better answers. He was realizing that answers themselves were the problem, that every explanation was a little murder of the thing being explained, that philosophy had become the art of making the unbearable bearable through clever argumentation, and this was philosophy's greatest crime. 1917 arrived like a promise finally kept. Revolution, the rational order crumbling. Everything that must be suddenly wasn't. Shestov wasn't naive enough to celebrate. He saw what happens when you replace one necessity with another, one system with another system that claims to end all systems. He saw the bodies piling up in the name of historical inevitability and scientific socialism. Athens wearing a different mask, but still Athens, still insisting that violence makes sense if you understand the dialectic. And we all understand that, don't we? He fled, first to the Crimea, then to Constantinople, and finally to Paris, where he'd spend the rest of his life as the kind of exile who knows he's not waiting to return. He was 54 years old. Everything he'd known was ash. Everything he'd built was rubble. And he sat down in a foreign city and wrote the most uncompromising philosophy Europe had ever seen. At the time, Husserl was perfecting phenomenology. Heidegger excavated being. The Vienna Circle reduced truth to logical verification. Every brilliant mind in Europe was trying to save philosophy by making it more rigorous, more scientific, more reasonable. And Shestov looked at this garden of rational flowers growing over civilization's mass grave, and he laughed, not with joy, but with recognition. They were doing what philosophers always do when the world burns, building elegant structures that explain why the burning was necessary. He wrote Athens and Jerusalem while Hitler rose and Europe pretended it could reason with unreason. He wrote that every philosophical system is a flight from reality disguised as an explanation of reality. He wrote that Spinoza's ethics wasn't wisdom but sedation. Kant's critique wasn't liberation but a more sophisticated cage. Hegel's absolute wasn't truth but totalitarianism with footnotes. He wrote that the moment philosophy offers comfort, it stops being philosophy and becomes therapy for people who've surrendered to necessity. His own life kept teaching the lesson he was learning to articulate: illness, displacement, watching his daughters navigate a world that treated their father's passport like a communicable disease. The Paris intellectual salons where he'd show up and politely savaged everything everyone believed. The loneliness of being the man who refuses consolation in a century desperate for it. Other exiles found community. Shestov found Kierkegaard, dead 50 years but more alive to Shestov than anyone breathing at the time. Kierkegaard, who'd also seen through the con, who'd also recognized that Christianity stopped being dangerous the moment it became reasonable, who'd also understood that faith isn't a conclusion you reach but a leap you make when all conclusions fail. Shestov called Kierkegaard the only honest philosopher since Job. Job who refused divine explanation. Job who wouldn't accept that his suffering had meaning even when God himself showed up to provide meaning. That's a pretty good argument, isn't it? Job who said, I want my life back, not your reasons. That refusal, Shestov wrote, is the beginning of real thinking. Everything else is just philosophy helping us accept our chains. He died in Paris in 1938. Europe was 1 year from the war that would prove him right about everything, and no one would notice because being right about catastrophe doesn't make you popular. His books were translated slowly, read by few and understood by fewer. Shestov offers nothing that you can use. No method, no practice, no steps to transformation, just the insistence that we are lying to ourselves when we pretend necessity is real and we're dying when we accept the lie. This is the man, born into order, trained in its grammar, exiled from its empires, and spending every word he had left refusing to be comforted by explanations for why order fails and empire falls and people suffer for reasons that reason finds perfectly reasonable. Well, the last bit was a mouthful. Right, let's move on. Athens versus Jerusalem. There are two cities in Shestov's mind, and they've been at war since thought began. Not real cities, architectures of the soul. Athens and Jerusalem, reason and faith. The laboratory and the burning bush. And every human being who's ever tried to think their way through existence is a battlefield where these two forces collide. Athens is beautiful, precise, the Parthenon gleaming white in Mediterranean sun. Socrates in the Agora teaching that virtue is knowledge, and knowledge is virtue, and if we just think clearly enough, we'll act rightly enough. Plato climbing out of the cave toward eternal forms. Aristotle cataloguing reality into categories that still organize university departments 23 centuries later. That's an accomplishment. This is Athens. The belief that truth is universal. That's very dramatic. This is Athens. The belief that truth is universal. This is Sparta. Oh, God's sake, that logic. Can I start again? Not the whole thing. This is Athens. The belief that truth is universal, that logic binds the cosmos, that two minds reasoning correctly will reach identical conclusions because reason transcends the merely personal. Athens says the universe runs on laws, physical laws, logical laws, moral laws if you're optimistic, and these laws don't care about you. They don't bend for you. They don't make exceptions because you're in pain or afraid or desperate. The electron orbits the nucleus. The syllogism moves from premises to conclusion. The marketplace finds equilibrium. And you can rage against these necessities, or you can understand them. But understanding is the only dignity available because the laws remain. Athens gave us geometry and medicine and the printing press and every technology that works the same way twice. Athens is why planes fly and bridges stand and your phone predicts the next word before you type it. Athens is humanity's greatest achievement, the taming of chaos through comprehension, the victory of pattern over randomness. Shestov fucking hated it. Not because it's wrong, but because it's a cage that we have mistaken for the world. Because Athens doesn't just describe necessity, it worships necessity. It turned the observation that things follow patterns into the metaphysical claim that things must follow patterns. It made what is into what has to be. And the moment you accept that anything has to be, you have surrendered freedom for the comfort of prediction. Jerusalem is different. It's older, it's uglier. It's not marble temples or symposiums, it's just Abraham with a knife raised over his son because God demanded the logically impossible. Just Moses at a bush that burns without consuming because the sacred doesn't obey thermodynamics. Just Job covered in boils demanding answers from a deity who responds with questions about whether Job can bind the chains of the Pleiades. Jerusalem doesn't argue, it doesn't prove, it doesn't build systems that any rational person would accept. Jerusalem insists, demands, proclaims the impossible and dares you to say it can't be done. It's the voice that says what is doesn't matter as much as what could be. That necessity is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid the terror of absolute freedom. That nothing must be as it is because the moment you accept must, you've accepted slavery. Athens says your depression is neurochemistry, serotonin deficiency, genetic predisposition, childhood trauma encoded in neural pathways. All true, all measurable, all treatable if you have the right medication and do the right therapy, and accept that your sadness makes sense given the variables. Jerusalem says maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're responding sanely to an insane world, and the insanity is pretending that chemistry explains consciousness. Athens says you're alone because the data shows your personality metrics don't align with available partners in your geographic area. Jerusalem says love isn't a matching algorithm, and the reduction of intimacy to compatibility scores is itself the thing making you lonely. Athens says you'll die because entropy is real and biological systems degrade, and no amount of wishful thinking changes thermodynamics. Jerusalem says maybe death isn't necessary. Maybe it's just what happens until it doesn't. Maybe the resurrection wasn't a metaphor. You see the problem? Jerusalem sounds fucking nuts. It sounds like wishful thinking or magical thinking or the kind of thinking that gets you institutionalized if you take it seriously. Athens sounds sane. It sounds like adulthood, like accepting reality as it is instead of how you wish it were. And this is exactly how Athens wins, by making its chains sound like maturity. Shestov watched philosophy surrender to Athens century by century. Christianity was Jerusalem once, radical, impossible, the claim that God became flesh and death became optional, and the last shall be first, and blessed are those who make no sense to the rational order. Then the church discovered Greek philosophy, discovered you could make Christianity respectable if you just filtered it through Aristotle, could make resurrection reasonable if you built enough logical proofs for immortality, could make faith safe if you turned it into systematic theology. By the time Aquinas finished, faith had become the handmaiden of reason, mystery became doctrine, the impossible became the merely supernatural, governed by different laws, but still laws, still necessity, something that made sense if you studied long enough. The same thing happened to everything Jerusalem touched. Kabbalah became numerology, Zen became philosophy of mind, Sufism became metaphysics. Every tradition that began with the shattering of rational categories ended with rational categories that explain the shattering. And the modern world is Athens all the fucking way down. Science explaining consciousness as emergence, psychology explaining love as attachment patterns, economics explaining human worth as market value, sociology explaining meaning as social construction. Every discipline a different method of reducing the inexplicable to the explicable. Every explanation a small murder of the thing being explained. You live in this, you breathe it. The algorithm that knows what you want before you want it. The productivity system that optimizes your time. That self-help book that gives you 7 steps to authenticity. Not mine, that has 13. All Athens, all necessity disguised as self-improvement. All chains we've learned to call liberation because they come with metrics that prove they're working. Jerusalem doesn't offer 7 steps. Jerusalem is the refusal to step at all. The insistence that you are not a problem to be solved, or a pattern to be sanitized, or a system to be understood. That the moment someone explains you completely, they have missed the whole fucking point. That freedom isn't found through better understanding, but through the rejection of understanding as adequate to existence. Shestov knew how this sounds. Knew he'd be dismissed as irrational, mystical, nihilistic. Knew that Athens has all the credentials and Jerusalem just has the conviction. But he also knew that every time a therapist reduces your suffering to neurotransmitters, every time an economist reduces your dignity to productivity, every time a philosopher reduces your questions to category errors, Athens is winning and you are losing, and the loss is so complete that you have learned to call it knowledge. The war is never over. It is happening right now in your head. The voice that says, be reasonable, fighting the voice that says, be free. The impulse to accept fighting, the impulse to refuse. Athens offering understanding, Jerusalem offering nothing but the terrifying possibility that nothing has to be necessary. Shestov chose sides, knew he'd lose, chose anyway. Because the choice itself is the last free act that we have, and if we surrender that, Athens doesn't just win the argument, it becomes the only argument anyone remembers how to have. The word necessary does more damage than any bullet ever fired, kills more quietly, more completely. Because bullets leave bodies, and bodies leave annoying questions, but necessity leaves nothing but acceptance, the shrug, the sigh, the resigned nod that says this is just how things are. Your rent increases and you can't afford it, but the market is the market. Necessary. Your job makes you want to drive into oncoming traffic, but you have bills and responsibilities and people depending on you. Necessary. Your relationship died 2 years ago, but you're still in it because starting over at your age with your history. Necessary. Your body is failing, and the doctor says it's age and genetics and there's nothing to be done except manage symptoms. Necessary. And each time you say it, each time you accept it, you're not acknowledging reality. You're building the bars of your own cage and calling it wisdom. Shestov saw how necessity functions as the ultimate oppressor. Not because it's false, necessity is real, markets do follow patterns, bodies do decay, choices have consequence. The horror isn't that necessity is a lie. The horror is that we've made it God, the final authority, the thing that settles all arguments. The moment someone says something is necessary, the conversation ends. Debate becomes pointless. Resistance becomes madness. This is what Athens accomplished. Not just the discovery of natural laws, but the sanctification of those laws. The transformation of is into must. Aristotle didn't just observe that objects fall. He built a metaphysics where falling was the actualization of potential. Spinoza didn't just map the universe, he called it God and called submission to its laws freedom. Hegel didn't just describe history, he made it dialectically necessary, every atrocity a required step in spirit's self-realization. Philosophy became the discipline of explaining why things had to be exactly as horrible as they are. Your boss exploits you. Marx explains it's the necessary contradiction of capitalism. Your lover leaves you. Freud explains it's the necessary repetition of childhood attachment trauma. Your country bombs civilians. Realpolitik explains it's the necessary logic of geopolitical competition, and every explanation is a little permission slip, not to fix the problem, but to accept it, to stop screaming and start understanding. Shestov asked a question nobody wanted to hear. What if understanding is the problem? What if every time we explain suffering, we make it more bearable, and making it more bearable makes it permanent? What if the therapist who helps you accept your anxiety is more dangerous than the anxiety itself because acceptance is surrender and surrender is death? Look at your life right now, the parts that hurt, the parts that feel wrong, the parts where you absolutely know that this isn't what existence should feel like. Now count how many of those parts you've explained, given reasons for, decided are necessary given your circumstances, your history, your economic position, your relationship patterns, your age, your options. You're not healing. You're dying by rationalization. The marketplace is the purest expression of necessity we've ever built. Well, not because it's cruel, but because it's logical. Your labor is worth what someone will pay for it. Not what you need to survive, not what your effort deserves, what the market determines. And the market is just supply meeting demand, billions of individual choices aggregating into an impersonal force that decides your worth. You can't argue with that. You can't reason with it. You can't appeal to justice or fairness or human dignity because those aren't variables in the equation. The market is necessary, efficient, rational. And if you can't afford rent or healthcare or the time to watch your children grow, that's not the market's failure. That's you failing to generate sufficient value in a system that values what it values necessarily. God, there's some tongue twisters in this one. Athens built this. The idea that human worth can be calculated, that everything has a price because everything can be reduced to exchange value. That poverty isn't violence but equilibrium. The market doesn't hate you. It doesn't even see you. You're just a variable. And variables don't have rights. They are functions. Shestov watched this logic eat everything. Watched it devour art and turn it into content. Devour love and turn it into partnership. Devour meaning and turn it into metrics. Every reduction a small murder. Every murder justified by necessity. Excuse me, I'm going back into Geralt of Rivia again. Has anybody seen Siri? Your phone knows you better than you know yourself. Knows what you'll click, what you'll buy, what you'll watch at 2 a.m. when sleep won't come and the algorithm serves up exactly the video that keeps you scrolling. This isn't magic, this is pattern recognition. Your behavior follows laws just like everything else, and the laws can be mapped, and the map can be monetized, and your attention can be harvested with the same industrial efficiency that harvests wheat. You are not a person to the algorithm, you are a pattern. And patterns are predictable, and predictability is profitable, and profit is necessary because that's how systems sustain themselves. The logic is perfect, the cage is complete, and you can't even see the bars because they're made of explanation. It's fucking invisible, that shit. Spinoza is the philosopher Shestov returned to again and again with special contempt. Not because Spinoza was stupid, but because he was brilliant. Brilliant enough to build a system so elegant, so geometrically perfect, that it turns slavery into freedom by redefining freedom as understanding your chains. The ethics reads like a proof. Propositions building on propositions. QED. Spinoza demonstrates that everything that happens necessarily, that God and nature are one and the same, that free will is illusion, that the only freedom available is understanding that you're not free. And he calls this blessedness, he calls it salvation, acceptance of total determinism, the highest form of human wisdom. Shestov called it the most dangerous book ever written, because it makes necessity beautiful. It makes slavery philosophical. Takes the horror of determinism and wraps it in such logical elegance that brilliant minds have been reading it for 3 centuries and calling it liberation. This is Athens at its apex, not denying the cage but convincing you that the cage is home. The same logic runs through every system that promises to explain you. Neuroscience reduces consciousness to neural correlates. Evolutionary psychology reduces love to reproductive strategy. Behavioral economics reduces choice to predictable irrationality. And each reduction comes with a promise. Understand the mechanism and you can manage it. Accept the necessity and you can optimize around it. But optimization isn't freedom. Optimization is learning to be a better prisoner. Learning which bars you can squeeze through and which you can't. Learning to want what's available instead of demanding what's impossible. And calling this wisdom instead of what actually is. Surrender. Shestov saw how this played out in his own moment. Freud explaining that civilization requires repression. Durkheim explaining that society requires sacrifice. Weber explaining that bureaucracy requires disenchantment. Every great thinker of modernity explaining why the modern world had to feel dead inside, had to strip meaning from existence, and to turn human beings into functions in systems they didn't choose and couldn't escape. And all of them, every single one, offering the same consolation. It's necessary. It's the price of progress. It's the inevitable result of rationalization. It's what happens when humanity grows up and stops believing in fairy tales about freedom and meaning and the possibility that things could be otherwise. Shestov said no. Said it wasn't inevitable. Said it was a choice we made and keep making. The choice to value explanation over existence. Understanding over freedom. The predictable over the possible. And every time we make that choice, we sacrifice something we'll never get back. Not comfort. Comfort is cheap. Comfort is what Athens offers in exchange for obedience. We sacrifice the capacity to refuse. To say that even if the logic is perfect and the data is overwhelming and every expert agrees, still no. This is not acceptable. This will not be borne. This must not be necessary, no matter how necessary it appears. That refusal is what Jerusalem represents. Not a better system, not a more accurate map, but the rejection of maps entirely. The insistence that you are not territory to be mapped, that your suffering doesn't need explanation to be illegitimate, that necessity itself might be the cruelest lie we've ever told ourselves. And the lie is winning. In your therapy sessions where you learn to accept your limitations, in your productivity apps that teach you to optimize your diminishing returns, in your dating profiles that reduce your soul to a list of preferences and deal breakers. In every moment you say it is what it is and move on instead of stopping and screaming that it shouldn't be what it is and you refuse to pretend otherwise. Necessity is the tyrant. Understanding is its weapon. And every explanation that makes your suffering make sense is a victory for the thing that's killing you. Faith for Shestov has nothing to do with Sunday morning or prayer beads or believing the right propositions about the afterlife. Faith isn't a supplement to reason. It isn't reason's weaker cousin for people who can't handle calculus. Faith is what happens when you stop asking for permission from the universe to want the impossible. It's Abraham with the knife, not because God promised it would all work out. God promised nothing. God demanded everything. Demanded Abraham murder the only thing that made his life meaningful, and didn't offer explanation or justification or even the courtesy of making sense. Just the command. The impossible command. And Abraham didn't refuse. He didn't negotiate or ask for reasons. He walked his son up the mountain because faith isn't belief in propositions. Faith is the capacity to act when every rational calculation says don't. This is what Athens can't metabolize. It can't even recognize as thinking. Because Athens needs grounds. It needs justification. It needs to build the case before making the move. Show me the evidence and I'll consider the conclusion. Prove it's possible and I'll attempt it. Explain how it works and I'll believe it works. Faith says fuck your grounds. Job is the other pole star in Shestov's constellation. Job, who lost everything. Children, wealth, health, skin rotting off his bones while his friends showed up with explanations. You sinned, Job. This is punishment. Accept it. Understand it. Let theology make your suffering comprehensible. And Job said no. Said I want my life back, not your systematic theodicy. Said I don't care if my suffering makes sense in the grand design. And he said, comfort me with your explanations and I'll curse you the way I'm cursing God. Job refused consolation. That refusal is faith. Not faith in God's benevolence. Job calls God a tyrant. Faith in the possibility of refusal itself. The possibility that even when everything that can be explained has been explained, you can still say the explanation isn't adequate to existence. The friends were Athens. Perfect Athens. They had it all figured out. Divine justice works like this. Suffering maps to sin like this. Accept the correlation and you'll find peace. They offered Job the same thing every philosopher since Plato has offered, a system that makes horror bearable by making it meaningful. Job told them to fuck off, told them their comfort was obscene, and God, when God finally showed up, didn't vindicate the friends, didn't say, yes, Job, you're right, you deserve this, here's the cosmic balance sheet. God said, did you make the ostrich stupid? Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook? Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Not answers, questions. Questions that don't resolve anything except that comprehension isn't the point. The point is Job refused. Refused explanation, refused acceptance. Refused to let his friends turn his agony into a theological problem with a theological solution. And that refusal, that unreasonable insistence that suffering shouldn't have to make sense to be illegitimate, is what faith looks like when it's not domesticated by Athens. Now look at what we've done with faith. We've turned it into a product, a service, a set of practices that produce measurable outcomes. Meditation apps that reduce anxiety, prayer that manifests abundance, spirituality that makes you calmer, more focused, more productive. Faith as optimisation. Faith as another tool in the self-improvement toolkit, as Athens in lotus position. Shestov would vomit. Real faith doesn't make you functional, doesn't help you perform better at the job that's killing you, doesn't give you inner peace while the world burns. Real faith is the thing that makes you unemployable, unmarketable, incomprehensible to everyone who's learned to accept necessity as wisdom. It's the shit that gets you banned on YouTube. Real faith is the woman who walks away from the career everyone said she should want because something in her nervous system says this isn't life, this is dying slowly with a salary. No backup plan, no rational justification, just the refusal to continue and the insistence that something else must be possible even when nothing else appears possible. Real faith is everyone who ever looked at what is and said, this cannot be all there is. Not because they had evidence of something more, but because accepting this as all there is would be accepting death while breathing. Shestov knew this looked like madness. He knew that from Athens' perspective, faith is just irrationality with conviction, the rejection of evidence, the embrace of wishful thinking, the refusal to accept reality as it is. And he said, yes, exactly, that's precisely what it is. And that's precisely why it matters. Because reality as it is includes your loneliness and your depression and your mortality and the fact that the people you love will die and the work you do doesn't matter And the algorithm has you figured out, and your therapist keeps asking how that makes you feel while charging you $200 to make peace with powerlessness. Athens says accept this, understand this, these are your terms, these are the laws. You can optimize around them or you can suffer pointlessly, but you cannot change them because they are necessary. Faith says watch me. Not because faith has a plan. Of course faith doesn't have a plan. Faith has refusal. The insistence that even if you're right, even if the science is settled and the logic is perfect and every expert agrees, I refuse. I refuse your necessity. I refuse your laws. I refuse to accept that what is must be. This is why faith can't be taught, and it can't be learned, and it can't be achieved through practice or discipline or the right combination of breathing exercises and affirmations. Faith isn't a skill. Faith is a rupture. It's the moment when everything that made sense stops making sense, and instead of rebuilding sense, you just stand in the wreckage and say, good, sense was the problem. Burn the whole fucking thing down. Dostoevsky's Underground Man understood this. The man who says even if you prove that 2 + 2 = 4 and prove that self-interest is rational and that enlightened egoism produces optimal outcomes, still I'll act against my own interest just to prove that I can. Just to prove I'm not a piano key you can press and predict the note. To prove that freedom matters more than being right. Athens calls him pathological, calls him self-destructive. The proof that some people need therapy more than philosophy. And the Underground Man would agree, would say, yes, I'm sick, my consciousness is diseased, and I'm more alive in my sickness than you are in your health, because health for you means acceptance, and acceptance means you're already dead. This is faith as insurrection, not against God, but against the idea that anything must be as it is, against biology that says you will die, and economics that says you're worth what you produce, or psychology that says you're suffering as a symptom to be managed. It's against every system that explains you into submission. And the deepest cut, the place where Shestov draws blood, is this. Faith offers nothing. No method, no path, no 7 steps to liberation, no promise that if you believe hard enough, things will work out. Faith isn't a technology, isn't a means to an end. Faith is the end itself, the refusal to be explained, the refusal to be predicted, the refusal to accept that the possible is limited to what Athens considers possible. You want to know what this looks like practically? It looks like failure. It looks like the person who quit the secure job and didn't find meaning but found poverty. It looks like the relationship that ended because someone demanded impossible love instead of sustainable partnership. It looks like the treatment refused and the sickness that won. Because faith doesn't promise success. Faith promises that you died refusing instead of living in acceptance. And maybe that sounds like nihilism. Maybe it sounds like Shestov is just dressing up despair in philosophical language, but there is a difference. Nihilism says nothing matters, so accept the void. Faith says nothing is necessary, so demand the impossible. Nihilism is Athens admitting defeat, whereas faith is Jerusalem refusing to fight on Athens' terms. The cost is everything. Your stability, your relationships, your sanity as measured by the people who've made peace with necessity. Shestov knew that choosing Jerusalem meant choosing exile, not just from Russia, but from the entire rational order that makes modern life possible. But he also knew what choosing Athens costs: your capacity to refuse, your ability to want what can't be calculated, your willingness to insist that even if you lose, even if you're wrong, even if everyone you trust says you're destroying yourself, still no. This is not acceptable. This will not be borne. That no is the last sacred thing we have, the last piece of ground where necessity hasn't planted its flag. And every time you accept what must be, every time you let explanation comfort you, and you choose understanding over freedom, you lose another inch of that ground. We don't live in Athens anymore. We live inside Athens. Athens as infrastructure. Athens as the air we breathe. Athens so total, so complete, so embedded in every surface we touch and every thought we think that calling it Athens makes it sound optional. Makes it sound like a choice we could unmake if we wanted to. You woke up this morning and the algorithm decided what you saw first. Not you, the algorithm. It knows when you're most vulnerable to which kinds of content. Knows that after sleeping poorly, you're more likely to engage with outrage. Knows that Sunday mornings you're susceptible to aspiration. Knows exactly how long to show you what before switching to something else, because your attention has patterns and patterns can be optimized, and optimization is just another word for control. This is Spinoza's dream made silicon. Not just understanding necessity, but automating it. Not just explaining human behavior, but predicting it with enough accuracy that prediction becomes prescription. The algorithm doesn't tell you what to want, it doesn't have to. Just shows you what you'll want 93% of the time based on the last 10,000 things you wanted, and that's close enough to certainty that the difference doesn't matter. You are not free, you are predicted. And prediction this accurate is indistinguishable from predestination. Netflix knows what you'll watch. Spotify knows what you'll listen to. Amazon knows what you'll buy. LinkedIn knows what job you'll take. And none of this is magic. None of this is artificial intelligence achieving consciousness. This is mathematics, statistics. The same rational laws that let us calculate planetary orbits now calculate your preferences. You follow those laws, behavioral, psychological, laws as predictable as gravity once you have enough data. The algorithm is Athens perfected, not arguing its case, not proving its theorems, just operating, working, delivering results that confirm its assumptions about you over and over until you forget you ever had the capacity to surprise yourself. Shestov saw this coming when he saw Spinoza turn ethics into geometry, when he saw Kant reduce freedom to following rules you give yourself, when he saw Hegel make history into an algorithm running toward an inevitable conclusion. The impulse is always the same. Take the chaotic, the unpredictable, the free, and demonstrate that it's not chaotic at all, not unpredictable, it's not free, just following laws we haven't mapped yet. And once the laws are mapped, once the patterns are recognized, once the system understands you completely, what exactly are you still protecting when you talk about freedom? Your phone listens. We all joke about it. You mention paper towels in conversations, and paper towels appear in your feed an hour later. You could be outraged. You could delete everything. You could go dark and put your phone in the microwave. Please don't fucking do that. But you won't, because the convenience is too convenient. Because the algorithm is too good at giving you what you didn't know you needed. Fighting it would mean sacrificing too much of the life you've built inside its system. This is how Athens wins now. Not through argument, through indispensability. Make the cage comfortable enough and people stop looking for exits. Make prediction accurate enough and people stop bothering with unpredictability. We make necessity smooth and people forget what resistance felt like. You perfect your morning routine. You track your habits. You measure your productivity. You rate your sweep. You rate your sleep quality. You log your calories. You monitor your screen time. You quantify your meditation practice. And you call all of this self-improvement, taking control of your life. This is your agency. Shestov would call this rehearsal for your own automation. Every metric you track is a pattern you reveal. Every habit you build is a behavior you make predictable. Optimization is a variable you hand over to the system that's learning to run you more efficiently than you run yourself. You think you're becoming better. You're becoming legible, calculable, a problem that's solving itself according to predetermined parameters. The therapy app, thanks to your smartwatch, knows that you're anxious. It offers evidence-based cognitive behavioral techniques, 7 exercises, 12-week program, measurable outcomes, track your progress, watch the line go down, here's a sticker, good fucking boy. Anxiety reduced by 37%, problem managed, life optimized. But what if the anxiety isn't the problem? What if the anxiety is your nervous system screaming that something is deeply wrong with a life lived inside algorithmic prediction? What if the thing making you anxious is precisely the reduction of existence to manageable variables? What if the cure is the disease in a more palatable form? Athens doesn't ask these questions. Athens measures, improves, and improvement is always defined by the system doing the measuring. Reduced anxiety means reduced friction. Increased productivity means increased output. Better mental health means better worker. The metrics are the values are the cage. And you can't opt out. There's no unsubscribe button. You can't live outside the system unless you're willing to walk into the woods and live in a fucking tent, because the algorithm isn't just in your phone, it's in your bank, your insurance, your credit score, your employment verification, your background check, your dating pool, your housing application, your kid's school placement. Every system you need to survive runs on data, and data runs on patterns, and patterns run on the assumption that you are predictable. Prove you're not, and you don't win freedom. You get flagged as anomalous. High risk, potentially fraudulent. The system doesn't celebrate unpredictability, it quarantines it. This is necessity weaponized, not just describing what is, but enforcing what must be. The algorithm doesn't just predict you'll pay your rent late. It raises your interest rate because you'll pay your rent late. It doesn't just predict you'll stay in a job you hate. It stops showing you other opportunities because you'll stay in a job you hate. The prediction becomes the prison, becomes the proof that the prediction was right. Shestov wrote that the ultimate tyranny would be a world where necessity became so total that even imagining alternatives would feel like insanity, where the gap between what is and what could be would close so completely that what is would simply be what is, and questioning it would be like questioning whether water is wet. We are there. We are past there. The algorithm has closed the gap, not through force, through service, through being so bloody good at giving us what we want that we've stopped wanting what it can't give us, through making life inside its prediction so smooth that life outside its prediction seems unnecessarily difficult. And the cruelest part is that we did it to ourselves. We built it ourselves. We wanted convenience, and fuck me, we got it. We wanted connection, and we got it. We wanted everything optimized and personalized and delivered, and we got exactly that. Athens didn't conquer us. We invited Athens in, and we built it a throne. We handed it our data, and now we sit in its court and call ourselves free because we can still choose between the options it presents. But the options it presents are the only options it calculates we'll choose. The freedom to pick from a menu you didn't write isn't freedom. It's the illusion of agency in a system that knows you better than you know yourself. Your search history, your purchase history, your location history, every history you have is a pattern the algorithm reads better than you do. It knows what you're going to search for before you search for it. It knows what you're going to buy before you buy it. It knows where you're going before you get there, and it knows these things because you've already done them in the past, and the past is the best predictor of the future when the future is just the past running its program. This is what happens when Athens doesn't just win the argument, when Athens becomes the operating system. You can't argue with an operating system. You can't reason with it. You can't convince it you're more than your data suggests because your data is all you are to the system that decides whether you get the loan or the job or the match. Jerusalem has no response to this. It can't build a counter-algorithm. It can't optimize resistance or quantify the refusal to be quantified. Everything Jerusalem represents, everything Shestov spent his life defending, has no purchase in a world where even your rebellion is a data point that makes you predictable. The algorithm knows you're going to be upset about surveillance. It knows you're going to delete the app, and then it knows you'll reinstall it within a week because the cost of disconnection is higher than the cost of compliance. It's already calculated your resistance, priced it in, moved on to the next variable. And maybe this is where Shestov's philosophy reaches its limit. Maybe faith can refuse necessity when necessity is a philosophical position. But when necessity is code running on servers processing your behavior in real time, what does refusal even look like? You can go off-grid, reject technology, and you'd be free in the sense that prisoners who starve themselves are free. You'd be free from the particular mechanism, but not free to live. Because the world that would support your freedom doesn't exist anymore. It's been replaced by a world that requires your compliance as the price of admission. And maybe, and this is the bit that keeps me up at night, maybe Shestov's entire project was always doomed. Maybe Athens was always going to win because Athens is the only thing that scales. Jerusalem is individual, particular, ungeneralizable. It can't build institutions, it can't create systems or organize society. It can only say no, and no doesn't feed anyone, doesn't house anyone, it doesn't protect anyone from the world as it actually functions. The algorithm feeds billions, houses billions, connects billions. It makes modern life possible for everyone. And all it asks in return is that you accept you're predictable, that your freedom is the freedom to choose from options it provides, that your individuality is a cluster of preferences that looks unique to you, but identical to your cohort. That's the trade. Convenience for freedom, optimization for autonomy, prediction for surprise, and billions of people every day take that trade because the alternative is living in a world that no longer has space for the unpredicted. Shestov would say this is exactly the moment that demands faith, the moment when necessity appears total, when resistance appears futile, when every rational calculation says accept, adapt, optimize yourself for the system that's already optimized for you. This is when Jerusalem matters, not as a solution, as a refusal. The refusal to let the algorithm be the final word on what's possible. But what does that refusal look like when the algorithm is in your pocket and your paycheck and your healthcare and your future? What does faith mean when the impossible isn't just improbable, but literally incomputable by the systems that determine whether you eat? Maybe it looks like failure, like the life that doesn't optimize, the career that doesn't scale, the love that doesn't match, the existence that refuses to be data, even if that means refusing to exist in the only way existence is currently recognized. Maybe it looks like madness, like insisting you're more than your patterns even when every pattern you've ever exhibited suggests you're not. Like demanding the impossible from a world that's eliminated the category of impossible by calculating every probability. Or maybe it just looks like this, like knowing the algorithm has you figured out and doing it anyway, choosing badly, wanting wrongly, insisting on the thing that doesn't make sense, not because it'll work, not because there's any reason to think resistance matters, but because the insistence itself is the last thing the algorithm predict, the last thing it can't optimize, the last thing that's still possibly, against all evidence and all reason, free. You're standing at the edge of your life and someone is explaining it to you. The therapist with the diagnosis, the economist with the market forces, the philosopher with the system. They're all saying the same thing in different languages. This is how it works. This is why it had to be this way. This is what the data shows. This is what reason demands. And you have a choice. Not the choice they're offering. Not the choice between accepting their explanation or finding a better explanation. The choice between explanation and refusal. Between Athens and Jerusalem. Between understanding your cage and breaking it, even if breaking it means bleeding. Shestov spent his entire life on the side that loses. He watched Athens win century after century, system after system, until reason became so total it stopped looking like a position and started looking like reality itself. And he kept saying no. Not because he had a better argument, but because he refused to let argument be the only game worth playing. We live in his nightmare now. Athens as algorithm, necessity as code. Your behaviour predicted with enough accuracy that free will isn't even a useful fiction anymore. Just a glitch in the pattern recognition. An outlier that proves the rule, and every day you wake up and feed the system more data about who you are and what you want, and the system gets better at being you than you are. This is the moment Shestov was preparing for, not with solutions, but with permission. Permission to refuse. To say that even if the algorithm is right, even if the therapy works, even if the explanation is perfect, still no. This is not adequate to existence. This cannot be all there is. I refuse your necessity, even if refusing costs everything. Jerusalem doesn't promise you'll win. It doesn't promise anything except that the fight itself matters, that the refusal itself is sacred, that the moment you stop saying no to necessity, you've accepted a death more complete than the one your body will eventually suffer. You can't opt out of the algorithm. You can't live outside the systems that require your predictability. You can't refuse modernity and still exist in any meaningful way inside modernity. Shestov knew this. He knew that your faith in the modern world looks like failure, looks like the life that doesn't work, the choice that doesn't make sense, the insistence that something is deeply wrong even when everything is optimized. But maybe that's the point. Maybe faith isn't supposed to work. It isn't supposed to make sense or produce measurable outcomes in a world where measurement is tyranny. Maybe faith is just the thing you protect when everything else has been calculated. The small space where you're still incomprehensible, still unpredicted, still capable of wanting the impossible, even when the impossible has been eliminated from every menu you're offered. Two cities, Athens and Jerusalem, reason and faith, the explainable and the absolute. And every moment of your life you're choosing between them whether you know it or not. Shestov chose, knew he'd lose, chose anyway. The question is whether you will. Thank you, you beautiful lot, for joining me today. If Shestov's war against necessity sounds more urgent than anything else you've heard today, that should tell you something. If tyranny makes you uncomfortable, and it fucking should, or if you realise the algorithm knows you better than you know yourself, and you've been calling that convenience instead of captivity, then good. That discomfort is standing between you and complete predictability. If you want to keep digging through these philosophical crime scenes with me, you can find the show in all the usual digital feeding troughs. We are on TikTok, Instagram and X with the handle @TheObservingEye, and we're on YouTube at youtube.com/@TheObservingEye as well. And then there is the Substack, which is the actual home base at theobservingeye.com. Go there if you want the full transcripts, the deeper explorations, and to listen to everything ad-free because fuck adverts. If something in this episode is haunting your senses, don't keep it to yourself. Join the conversation, drop a comment, send a message, fire an email into the digital void at david@theobservingeye.com. I am on the other end, staring blankly into the abyss, eagerly awaiting your messages. And if you want to support the show, don't just passively consume it. Share it. Hand it to someone whose optimized, algorithm-curated life needs a bit of disruption. Give it to the person who's one data point away from complete predictability. Thank you for listening. You know I mean that. Your time and attention are the last things you own that haven't been fully calculated yet, so I appreciate you spending it here, and I hope it was worth it. Take care, everybody. Much love. I'll catch you soon.